you raise money in a really crazy, irrational time from a funding perspective.
And after that.
And after that. So you raised a number of rounds, but let's maybe talk about the early rounds, the first couple rounds, and then you had some really big rounds, and you also brought in some really big venture names. And so maybe start with the early rounds and talk about that experience, because a lot of people here, I'm sure, are either looking for money or with companies that are going through that or may go through that in the future. And great to get your thought, your experience, and what you learned.
Yeah, so lots of lessons for me along the way. One of the big things that that I was, bent on when I was raising capital was to figure out how could I get as many vested people around me as possible, had a vested interest in our success as possible. So we went out to raise $500,000, and it was a very frothy time. We got $1.2 million committed, and then we squeezed everyone down pro rata to $750 because we wanted as many investors around the table as we could if we needed to get a VP of marketing or VP of sales or whatever it might be. We wanted to have a network to reach out to. I think we went a little overboard. We had 45 investors in our first round. And so, the cost of taking care of that many investors was certainly a lot from legal stuff and all that. But, and so, so then we closed that round, and then the next day opened up another round because we were so oversubscribed, or, multiplied the pre-money times 4, and then closed that round 3 weeks, raised $2 million and closed that round 3 weeks later.
Wow.
And so some lessons that we learned along the way was thinking about, I have kind of my 5 value propositions that I think about, or ways that I measure, is an investor right for the business and what I'm doing. One is I think about, can they help us with an exit? Mm-hmm. Can they help us recruit? Can they help us think strategically? Can they help us from a business development standpoint, whether it be introduction to customers or partnerships? And then the 5th is certainly money now, but also the ability to be able to invest later so that you can keep the next round of investors honest to some degree. So, we didn't do that very well. Certainly the last one of being able to invest now and later with these early on rounds, and that it was a bunch of friends and family and that kind of stuff. And so as we went into negotiations down the road, we didn't have a stronger investor base that we could go back to and sort of keep these folks honest. It ended up working out for us okay, but it was, I kind of have my 2, and I oversimplify it for sure, but my 2 steps to raising capital. One is create scarcity, and 2 is get the first check. So creating scarcity, and how do we sort of understand who the world of potential investors are that makes sense for our business. If someone made all their money in real estate, they're not a good technology investor, in my opinion, and so, and vice versa. And so what we did is one of the things we learned along the way is, okay, let's make sure that our first interaction with a potential investor isn't asking for a check. How do we get to know the people that, and let the people get to know us that we want to eventually raise capital?
So how do you do that? Because these guys are pretty well insulated at some level.
So so I was certainly not shy about sort of seeing them at a conference or an event like this, and then following them on their way to their car or whatever, or offering to drive them to the airport the next trip they had, or all kinds of things like that. I mean, we did a lot to try and get in front of potential investors. And one of the things is we would put together our sort of monthly email of, this is what we accomplished last month, this is what we're going to accomplish next month, and then the next month we'd send an email out, this is what we accomplished, this is what we told you we were going to accomplish, this is what we accomplished, this is what we didn't, this is what we're going to do this month. So we tried to make sure we had touch points along the way with them, so that when we did finally want to raise capital, now you go out to 5 or 6 of them, or really about 12 or 14 of them at the same time, so you hopefully create this sense of urgency.
And, there's an important point I just highlight for you guys. I had lunch with a venture capitalist today who's one of the more successful ones in the country, and I was talking about Eric Lefkowski and Brad Keywell, and he knows them well, and I said, obviously I don't know anybody who's had the kind of track record they've had, even before Groupon in the last decade. It's really fantastic. And I like them both, and I really respect and admire what they've done. But I said, what would be the one thing that you say is different about them than other people? And it's very much what Chuck just said they focused on, which is they really just focus unrelentingly on what they consider to be the most critical things they have to do. And they are just incredibly disciplined of like, did we do it? Now, what are we going to do differently? How do we get it to work, and experimenting? And I think that's a universal lesson that everybody go, oh yeah, that makes sense. I try and focus, but it's Pat Lencioni, the guy who wrote 5 Dysfunctions of the Team, has a statement which he said, the best CEOs he's seen are typically perceived as somewhat unreasonable. And it's that kind of overbearing focus that really, I think, brings the best out of these things. And I think it's a great tribute to you that you saw that even before you learned the hard way.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so, I mean, one of the things that I used to do was essentially there's a magazine that came out called Industry Standard. And it was similar to what Wired would be today type of thing. And so what I would do is just sort of each week when it came out is I'd flip through and who was being profiled, and then I'd reach out and call them and say, and whatever the questions were I would have that day, whether it might be about real estate issues, like should we lease or try and buy, or I don't know, whatever the questions might be. How do we hire people? Should we insource or outsource our development? So whatever the questions were, I would just reach out to random entrepreneurs and say, hey, what's your thinking on this? How would you think about this?
And were they responsive?
Yeah, very much so. Probably 90% of the people I reached out to would spend 20 minutes on the phone, 30 minutes on the phone, just sort of answering. So.
Fantastic. That's great. So you raised a lot of money right as the door was closing. Talk about those, because I think those are interesting, and then I'd love to talk a little bit about Benchmark and Bill Gurley. But first, just that story, because it's a fantastically interesting story.
Yeah.
The bubble is bursting.
So we raised a $10.5 million round right before. So we closed it in essentially January of 2000. So we were in a. So there was a venture investor named Adam Dell. You may know his brother. His brother's in the computer business as well, named Michael. Michael or Adam was managing some of Michael's money from in a venture capital sort of as a venture capitalist, and so Adam was pretty interested in doing a deal with a West Coast firm, that sort of helped him, continue to build his brand and put his name on the map. And we had been targeting Bill Gurley as one of our, what we thought would be a great potential partner. And
Bill Gurley of Benchmark Capital.
Benchmark
and
Capital.
Benchmark was, really really to big prominence at this point.
Yeah, they were doing sort of, them and Sequoia and Kleiner Perkins were, again, sort of doing all the big deals, or most of them. There's NEA and some others. But so we were targeting Bill as one of sort of our professional leads. And apparently Bill told Adam, and we sort of learned this later, that he couldn't lead, but he would follow if Adam led. Because I guess Bill had randomly showed up to 3 of our restaurants the past week, and then the host would pull him around, because he asked the host what it was, and the host would pull him around and show him. And so he was kind of intrigued, and he was one of the people I've been communicating with along the way. Bill would send me these 2-line email or 1-sentence emails, and I'd have a 3-page response, which was the wrong thing to do, but
you cared.
Yeah. So Bill told Adam that, hey, if you invest in these guys, I'll follow, but I can't lead. And so it was a Thursday, about 11:30. We were meeting Adam, me and my 2 senior team members. We had 64 people on the payroll. We had payroll due Friday morning, and we didn't have enough cash to cover it. So we didn't. And so we had 2 more Hail Mary meetings that afternoon that we were going to go to. And about 10 minutes into, 15 minutes into the lunch, Adam says, I'm in. And so we're kind of looking at him, and what does that mean? And so, we kind of say, hey, we're really excited, this is great, slapping him on the back, and thrilled to have you. We got one problem, though. So.
Did you bring the money with you?
So I said, we have payroll in the morning, and we can't make it. And so he turned and looked at us and said, well, $1 million due. I said, yeah, $1 million to cover payroll. And so he told us to get our wiring information. So I, pulled over my Motorola flip phone, the big ones. I'm nervously calling our office. Our controller gives me, and I give it to Adam. He calls New York, his office, and that afternoon he wired us $1 million. No terms, no signatures, no final agreement, just that he was in. So,
Wow.
so we made payroll, which was good. And actually, I mean, the good news is, there's a reciprocity to this in that Adam, through the lifetime of the company, invested like $11 million and got back, I don't know, 110 or 120 million. So
That's
he
great.
did okay on it. So
He earned it, though.
yes, he did.